it's a great piece by Brant James over at USA Today, their sports section, and it was an article feature piece on Sage Karam. Now, as many have known, that Sage Karam's not had the best 12 months, so to speak. He was really starting to come together in IndyCar around this time last season. He seemed to have been a very strong, aggressive, but good placing oval specialist. He had a couple of dodgy moments, but the guy looked like he was a real talent and a guy to watch out for. He's only 20 years old at the time, and a real guy to keep an eye on for the future in IndyCar. But he crashed in Pocono, and it was a part of his car that came off, and that's what struck Justin Wilson in the head, and that's ultimately what ended his life. And Karam would then go on to lose his seat at Chip Ganassi due to lack of funding. That seat went to Max Chilton, as we know. And then he lost his spot in the sports car team again due to funding concerns. And now Karam's kind of, he's back for the 500 as a one-off entrant. But it was a great piece. I don't want to give too much away because I'd like you to go out and read it. Again, I'll put a link to this in the description for the podcast when it comes out. But it's a very powerful piece by Brant, talking about Sage in the back and talking about his emotional experiences by, dealing with Justin's passing and him reaching out to people like Stefan, Justin's brother, and other people that were involved, and just the struggle that he's had to go through, on track and off track since that's happened. And it's something I wanted to talk about on the podcast because as much as I joke and as much as I like to as much as I'm a very, I try and be entertaining when it comes to this podcast, I do like serious topics like this every once in a while because I like having conversations that people wouldn't normally have. And I believe that, I still believe this, and this is something as a general sports fan that I've noticed over the years, and it's that I feel like the status of mental health in sport is still very much a taboo subject that not many people talk about, and I've seen many examples of this over the last few years. I remember Jonathan Trott in the England cricket team, who essentially pulled out because he felt like he was suffering from burnout, and as well as suspected depression. He was seen as a psychologist within England cricket, and many people like Piers Morgan cynically believed that it was a situation where he'd given up on the team because he couldn't hack it, so to speak. The nature of being manly, being masculine and whatnot, and obviously the nature of that being an impediment for when something goes wrong. I mean, Ronnie O'Sullivan in snooker's had depression problems. I know that he's got a sports psychologist and whatnot, and we've seen it come up in many sports. I know Clark Carlisle in football case, and there's another famous example where he almost committed suicide. He attempted suicide last year, and that was a very sad moment where football's concerned. But Johnson, you know where I'm going with this, and it was a gut-wrenching read for me when I read this piece about Sage, and he is such a talent. And as much as we've joked about him on the show before, the kid is very, very quick indeed, and it's a real shame that his career has not only been held back by lack of funding, but also a mental barrier that he seems to have put up for himself since Pocono last season.
It's so difficult to almost talk about. I mean, this is a subject that is close to our hearts, without going into a huge amount of detail. Basically, the fact is, for you folks, more people than you probably know or assume have mental health issues at some point in their life.
Absolutely.
Be it anxiety, of which I'm not afraid to admit I've had some really bad issues with at various points. Depression is probably the worst. Is one of the worst ones. It's one of the most evil ones. It's one of those that.
That's awful.
This is what I got from reading this interview with Sage, who let's not forget is only 21 this year. He's 3 years younger than me, and I believe you too, Dre.
Yeah.
He's 3 years younger than both of us, and this is a guy who, age 20, was a IndyCar rookie, and then had to go through something that no one should ever go through in sport. And the horrible thing is with depression is that it doesn't make any sense a lot of the time. And what really struck me in this article was how he explained the article explained that there were so many drivers who are reaching out to him. Stefan Wilson, Justin's brother, who's driving in the 500 this weekend, reached out to him and said, Sage, it wasn't your fault. And his father, Jody Karam, said the same thing. And there were other drivers reaching out to him after the incident. But it almost didn't make any difference in his own mind because of how the nature of these mental health issues and the way depression works. It was almost like the mind was made up. And that is a horrific thing for someone to have to go through. And what really touched me in this piece, it's great to see him back at the 500. It's great to see him return to the track. I feel like with every lap he's turned, he will feel much more back at home again. It just feels to me like it was one thing after another. Everything sort of fell apart at the end of last year for him in more ways than one. And seeing him back at the Indy 500 is fantastic. But what I also felt was very touching is he said he demands, or really wanted to, and I believe his counsellor also mentioned this, he wanted to return to Pocono. He wanted to race at Pocono again. To almost, it's like that sort of psychological way of kind of facing your fear. You know, the only way to get over a phobia, or a way of treating a phobia, is to confront it head on. And it almost feels like that sort of psychological block, that mental issue. He says at the end of it, I won't spoil anything else about the article, but he says, I think in order for me to put all this behind me, I need to go through turn one flat again. It's simple as that. And once you do that, you're back for good. So he wants to, I hope they can put something together for him to go back to Pocono and race there again. Because I think everyone, the thing is, and this is the horrible thing about mental health in sport, no one in sport wants to admit a weakness. And if mental health issues like this are a weakness, they are something that can make you really embarrassed and really feel like you're pretty useless. Like for some, like admitting some of the things that trigger panic attacks for many people can seem so like people are just going to laugh at you. And you mentioned the case there with Jonathan Trott. The fact that straight away he had Piers King Morgan, trying really hard not to swear here.
Feel free.
The fact he had Piers Morgan banging on about not being a man and not being able to take it. There's why there's still a stigma around mental health issues today, not just in sport. That's exactly what sports people and a lot of people with mental health issues fear. You are conditioned in sport as an athlete, as a professional sports man or woman, to not show fear, not show weakness, and not give your opponent anything. Yeah. So that directly contradicts the fact that in most cases the best way to open up about mental health issues is to talk about them.
I've always
and this is why it's almost like one of the last taboos in motorsport. It's kind of up there alongside the issue of coming out as gay in the locker room. It's a very similar scenario, and I really, what's nice about this is that Sage appears to be has beaten off a lot of his demons, but I feel like as soon as the green flag drops next weekend, that'll be a big step forward for him as well. And I hope it's onwards and upwards from here. And I'm really pleased to hear that he's had plenty of support from counsellors, from his own family, and from the other drivers. They've really rallied around him. Yeah,
that's a wonderful thing to see, and I can relate. I mean, as a guy that grew up feeling like I was a terrible human being because I couldn't talk to people. I didn't find out I had Asperger's till I was 17 years old, and I'm 23 now. And it like I still often get ashamed of things like asking for help, and it's something that's affected me on a mental.
You and me both, man.
Yeah, and because there is still mental health is still something that I think so many countries, so many areas of life need to address. Far more.
This is not just a motorsport issue now. It's almost like a society-wide thing.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
It sort of hits home more when a sports person comes out and admits it, because it's almost like we hold them up as the great heroes, and you almost assume they're above such things.
Exactly.
It doesn't happen to them.
Yeah, we tend to look at guys like Ayrton Senna. We like, for example, we put them as sentient beings, essentially, where we often feel like they're invincible, and we idolise them. If we feel like they're unflappable, they can't possibly suffer from something like this. What are you talking about? They're racing drivers. How could they possibly do something like that? And it reminds me.
And especially when you get into the whole argument of, oh, look at what they're paid a huge amount of money to do what they want for a living. How on earth could they be depressed about anything?
Exactly. It's just all those kind of taboo, stigma, obvious stereotypes that don't add up, and when it comes to reality, because anybody can suffer from depression. It's a mental illness, like any illness. Anybody can get it at any time. It's a situation where it doesn't have to make sense for it to not to happen. It can happen during anything, and
someone once explained to me that one of the worst bits about depression is it's not exactly like you can point to a bruise on your arm or like an arrow through your knee or something like that. You can't go, here, look, this is broken, help fix me. Oh yeah, you've got a broken leg, something like that. Mm-hmm. If you just say, my brain's broken, which effectively is what it is, it's difficult.
It's awful. It's awful in every way. I mean, King, have you got 2 cents on this real quick? Because I know you've been pretty quiet in this section. But...
Yeah, I mean, Sage has gone through a lot in his career before this, like mainly his conflict with the Andrettis, where he used to be an Andretti driver until I think he was about 17, and they basically just dropped him because they knew he was going to be, he had a long-time rivalry with Marco Andretti, and he was much better than Marco. I know he raced with Andretti back in 2010 in the F2000 National Championship, and he won the National Championship, and it was a 12-race season, and he won 8. He won 9 of the 12 races that season, and by 2 years later, they basically just dropped him because they didn't want him anymore, and basically he needed a team to give him a drive because he doesn't come from a well-off family. I think his mom's a nurse and his dad's a school teacher, so they couldn't afford to send him to go racing. So basically, the Andrettis thought it would be the end of his career, that they thought they could get rid of Sage, that IndyCar would be a place where he would not belong.
It's awful. It's awful that, they can manipulate the lives of teenagers like that have dreams, that they have aspirations, and like you're absolutely right. Sage has gone through things that most teenagers just don't go through, and especially when you've been thrust into the limelight for being told you're going to be an amazing driver, you've got all your career paths laid out in front of you, and then to have it ripped away, then come back, and again we all saw it last season. He had some spectacular performances in places like Iowa, where he got into that feud with Ed Carpenter, but he held his own out there. He finished in the top 5 on a couple of occasions, and the kid's an immense talent, and he should be in IndyCar full time, in my opinion. And it's gut wrenching that a guy that has to go through that kind of mental anguish, even though like having that mental blood on his hands, even though we all know that no one ever held Sage responsible for what happened to Justin by any stretch of the imagination. It could have, there's literally 10 million scenarios that could have happened with Sage going into that turn 1 on that lap, and most likely 9.999 million of them would not have killed Justin. It's just one of those incredibly unfortunate things but I mean, all I can say is, as someone that suffers from Asperger's and suffers from being on the autism spectrum and has to deal with it every day, all I can say is, if you have anything like anxiety, a mental health problem, talk to somebody. Seriously. Do it.
It feels like the scariest thing in the world.
It does.
But as soon as you've got someone, as soon as you have someone who doesn't immediately scream and run away, as you assume that they will, because how on earth can someone be friends with someone as messed up as you? Yeah. As soon as you realise they're not running away and they're on your side, that's like the most powerful thing in starting getting better. Mm-hmm. And I speak from experience on that. Dre, I think you're in the same spot.
Absolutely, without question. And all I can say is talk to people. And it's a shame that I feel that motorsport and other sported entities have dropped the ball on this, because I think it's a very serious matter that I don't think gets talked about enough, and that's mental health in sport in general. And I hope that pieces like this, a great piece, like I said, on Sage Karam in USA Today, I hope it can encourage more people to start having those conversations, because as much as difficult as they sound and as daunting as they may be, if it helps one person, in my opinion, it's worth it. And I know it seems hard. I know it's a complicated subject that I know that many people just will not understand. But the more we talk about it, maybe we can all find a greater understanding for these things, and going forward, we can have a brighter, more understanding and more respectful society in sport and in the world in general. Because we all know mental health has still got so many stigmas and false stereotypes regarding it, and hopefully going forward, we can have a brighter world where these things just aren't brought up as much, and maybe they're not as crippling a factor. Maybe we can all just deal with it a little bit better. But yeah, there we go. Moving on to MotoGP, and obviously a slightly brighter subject.
Basically, summation of that segment, we're with the Sage.
Yeah,
Yeah.
with the Sage.